And for a fiction writer, all that we do is the same thing the academic does, except then we lie, you know. Carlos Fuentes defined the novel as a pack of lies hounding the truth. And in pursuit of the, you know, that larger implication of things, but it's the truest lie we can tell, and that's the point. We sit in, you know, every nascent fiction writer has spent time on a train or in a bus station or in a restaurant just watching, listening, or at a party or whatever. We are always open to the encounter with the resonant thing. And it really goes back to the everyday. We look at everyday life and we try to see, we respond to the universal thing that is reflected there. Now, we respond to that universal thing ultimately, basically, not with our minds, but with our unconscious, with our sensual being. Because the object we create is of the senses. The object that the scholar creates is of the mind. And so these postcards and what has been written on the back it's like sitting across from the stranger in a bus station or at the airport and reading the manner and watching the gesture and the body posture relationship to the person who's with them and just responding to the life and the relationships and the emotional state of the person before you. Because, of course, that's the way in which the fiction writer must record it, must create an object through it. That is, the art object is an object of the senses. Artists are not intellectuals. Artists are sensualists. You create an object that you encounter and in a primary way and respond to it through the senses. And so we are always absorbing and putting into our unconscious that relationship of the sensual flow of things. The postcards, as you can hear, the good ones, the really interesting, arresting ones in terms of the backs, are the ones where there is that telling sensual detail, and there is the rhythm of speech, the rhythm of everyday speech. There is a moment-to-moment sensual encounter with the writer, with the speaker to the page here. That the forms of rhetoric are the forms of emotion, are the forms of personality. And saying all of this, you can see why I not only started collecting postcards, but why they were so interesting. Now, the great British novelist Graham Greene once said, all good novelists have bad memories. He says, what you remember comes out as journalism. What you forget goes into the compost of the imagination. And so it took 14 years of many, many, many Sunday afternoons just sitting down as you would with a book and gathering and going through, and I had a very extensive collection of all this. Just going through and flipping a card and hearing these voices. People long since passed from this earth. And yet, in their everyday writing, that fragment of their mind and heart remains. And to read it and to hear it. And I've read it the 5th time, and now I'm suddenly picking up some nuance of that writing that I had not noticed before. And eventually all of that gathered in me, and I realized that those characters were now living in my unconscious, and that their voices were there, and those voices really wanted to tell the rest of these stories.
So can I have a follow-up question?
Oh, sure.
So you also collect letters, is that correct?
I have, yeah. When they come to my attention, yeah. Okay. And I've got a series of diaries of a woman who have to read closely, but she was being physically abused by her husband, and she would draw little skull and crossbones on each day when she had been abused, and there is an arc to those, and I mean things like that. And yeah, so I collect everything where the human mind and heart can be read.
So, well, what I'm reacting to partly is what you're saying here about the rhythm of speech that you see in the postcards and the telling detail. And it just, I mean, one thing that sort of struck me as you were talking about it had to do with the fact that a postcard has only so much space on it. And so it's a question, really. It's a sort of thinking aloud as well. You know, a letter affords you more space. I mean, in effect, a letter could be infinite. They're not, ordinarily, as far as I'm able to tell. But they do give you much more space. There's less need. Would you agree that there's less need to find the telling detail?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's why they're not nearly as interesting.
Yeah.
The writer has to have a kind of writing talent to start with if you've got an open canvas.
Yeah.
But when the writer's emotion is compressed into that tiny space, yeah. It overcomes most writers. I mean, you know, the writing is not going to be very revealing,
right?
Because, as with bad writing of all kinds, there's bad writing in every freshman composition class taught in every university. There's a lot of bad writing, but it's because the writer is not actually in touch with the voice that is most natural to them. In a letter, there's a kind of, okay, now I'm sitting down, it's an open end, and all that you have been taught, the way you've been taught kicks in, and because most teaching, most pedagogy never says, okay, you've now taken all these other voices on in order to absorb some patterns that might actually fit you. Now we want you to forget everything that you've done. Don't write like that anymore. And now let's see how you really sound on your own on the page. I mean, it seems to me every composition course in the world, or at least some composition course at the end of all those others, has to do that in order to make a writer really a writer. And since most people, especially in the letter form, they talk like in all those phony put-on voices, consciously using words that really aren't their own. In that short space, they know instinctively they can't rely on that. And so they're more apt to say something in a direct, I mean, there's really 26 great examples over there.
Right.
Say something that really is an outcropping of who they are.
Yeah.
That is an innate, you know, an implicit expression of the pattern of their mind and heart.
That's lovely, thank you. We have time for one or two questions, and I expect I'm not the only one who has them. Please.
Bob, you said that you focused almost exclusively on the text on the back, correct? And it's by immersing yourself in the text on the verso side of the
that had to be there. The relationship of the text to the image, of course, was crucial as well.
That's
in terms of, it's not exclusive. What I exclusively looked for were cards that had text on the back, because that was the thing that this person added to it. But the person also chose the image, and you know, because I teach the way I do, creative writing, and because I'm always facing the paradox of teaching abstractly and theoretically and philosophically and with the discourse of the mind, the content of which is that when you write a work of art, you have to put the mind aside, you have to, you know, avoid philosophy and abstraction and so forth. I mean, that paradox was always with me. So back when I first came here, under the auspices of the FSU website, late fall of 2001, I did a 17-session webcast where I actually wrote, and I was about to write this postcards book. I took a bunch of postcards. We had a couple of cameras in my office, and they edited down the hall, so I was alone here. It was only a virtual audience, which helped. And I wrote a literary short story from the first inspiration, which was a postcard, to the final polished story. And I did 17 two-hour sessions, although we were ready to go as long as it took. You see every comma stroke in real time. All the lousy, rotten sentences go up and get rewritten, and you watch the research online while I do it. You watch everything. And it was one of these postcards. But that one was an early real photo postcard of the blank sky up above and this impossibly fragile-looking biplane up there against the sky. And if you look closely, the upper right wing is tearing away. And the message on the back is, "This is Earl Sant of Erie, Pennsylvania, just before he fell." And Earl Sant, Google. I've been writing a lot of books now. The last 6, 7 books have been set in past periods, and any one of those books I should have dedicated to Google. I mean, the resource is amazing. But you know, Earl Sant was an early pioneer aviation guy, and indeed crashed in a public demonstration and died. So there, of course, the relationship of image to text. In fact, the text itself was very simple, but its relationship to the image was crucial as well. By the way, just a digression, I wrote a book. The book that's coming out this fall was in fact a novel that came out of one of those postcards. It was in the postcard book. It's called The One in White, and in fact it was in the Atlantic Monthly and won one of those National Magazine Awards. Well, I couldn't let go of that narrative voice. It was a swashbuckling American war correspondent, newspaperman, covering America's invasion of Mexico in March of 1914. Sort of slipped under the radar. Woodrow Wilson invaded Mexico. We occupied a part of the country for 7 months because we didn't like the dictator in power and because in order to protect American oil interests. So